Oh, it's crooked. Maybe it's not. It's going to be a long chapter. Hey everyone, how's it going? Doug here, and we are back with Chapter 10 of Archangel. And I know what you're thinking. It's been a long time since Doug got his haircut, and you're 100% right. But you're also probably thinking, man, it's been a long time since we read along with Archangel. That's not in the frame. But you're also thinking it's been a long time since we've read along with Archangel, and kind of left you hanging. If you're wondering where I've been, what's been happening, boom, popping something up there so you can go see what's going on with Archangel and its sequel, Revelations, which is coming out soon. No definitive date yet, but we're getting closer, I promise. When we left off last time, way back when, Uriel, Shandra, and all the angels from Sanctuary had gone on a mission and begun systematically clearing a town filled with demons. So, we're just going to jump right back into it with Chapter 10. Get comfy, get a snack, drink some water, please. Always stay hydrated, and enjoy. The angels in the Cambion continue to move as one unit, methodically making their way through houses and buildings that sheltered demons. Raphael would not even use words to direct them anymore. He would merely point to a house and nod. His face was plastered with dark blood from the demons that he felled himself. The excitement in his eyes shone brightly in contrast to the splotches that marred his face. Even Azael was in slightly better spirits after a pair of demons fled from Raphael and his twin pistols. The large angel walked with a limp, but his massive fists made short work of the demons, who were not expecting to face such a monster out on the streets. Uriel also reveled at being back in the fight against the creatures of hell, but he was astounded at how many demons there were. He and the others had only swept through a section of the town, and he had already killed more than 30 of the things himself. Chandra did not seem as concerned as the Archangel. Uriel could tell that she was just as worried about those in her company as she was the beasts they hunted. Even though Ariel had assured the both of them that she bore no ill will towards the Cambion, the other angels that had joined them pointedly avoided looking at her. Azael was the exception among them, though nothing other than being kept out of the fight seemed to affect his jovial mood. On top of it all, Uriel knew that Chandra was worried about her sister. Even though she did not say it, the Archangel could see it in her eyes. He was happy to know that he would reunite the two soon enough. It had taken the group over 3 hours to clear the part of the town that Raphael had designated as theirs. Aside from Azael, none of them faced any serious injury. The party moved closer to the town center where they were due to rendezvous with the others. The buildings they were entering now were less residential. Instead, the angels were kicking down doors framed by a faded red brick that marked the oldest buildings of the town. Worn cobblestones that were meant to make the roads look old were cracked and home to whatever weeds were resilient enough to grow in the arid environment. The stores, restaurants, and apartments all showed the same signs as the houses they had visited before. Boarded up doors and windows, vandalism painted across their exteriors, and far too many corpses, both old and new. Fewer demons were in this part of the town. They were pack animals, Uriel knew, but they were territorial and violent. It would make sense for the creatures to live in small, spread-out clusters. They did encounter some demons in the older buildings, but not nearly as many as before. It allowed them to pick up their pace towards the rendezvous. Following Raphael, the group came upon a decrepit diner, its pink walls weathered and peeling. Whatever sign bore its name had been destroyed long before the angels arrived, though the advertisement for best coffee in the county was still visible among the tags of vandals and the bloodstains of those who had met their end at the claws of a demon. Uriel saw movement from within the diner. Despite their efficiency, theirs was not the first group of angels to arrive. Raquiel was leaning against the wall next to the diner's door. He nodded at the other angels as they approached, though he seemed content with keeping their interactions to just that. It was no surprise that Raquiel's group would be the first to arrive. The angel's talent allowed him to detect demons far more accurately than any of the other warriors. Even under the black clouds, Raquiel would have directed his companions with merciless efficiency. Uriel examined the clairvoyant angel as they approached the diner. His long limbs and slim stature hid his natural strength, but the angel's bare arms were toned and heavily tattooed. He had an angular face that made him look like he was always suspicious of something. Both sides of his head were shaved, and he kept his chestnut hair swept back. The tattoos that covered Raquiel's body even extended up the shaved parts of his head. Angels had runes all over their body, but Uriel had only seen a few take on so many markings. Uriel looked at the other angel's eyes, which were already boring into him, but, the Archangel thought, they were not really seeing him. Those eyes were looking at something else. "Any incidents?" Raphael inquired as they got closer to the diner and the angels. Raquiel shook his head. "None to report, sir." "Good." The Archangel pulled open the diner door. It whined in response and strained against its top hinge. The inside of the diner was the same hideous pink as the outside, though it had been spared from most of the weathering and vandalism that marred the exterior. Still, the fake retro posters did not do much to improve the bubblegum pink walls. 4 other angels were already in the building. They glanced up at the newcomers, but their gazes avoided Shandra and Uriel. The Cambion and the Archangel sat at a table along one of the walls, while most of the other angels chose to sit away from them. Ariel and Azael, however, followed the pair. Ariel sat across the table from them, while Azael, whose large frame would not fit in between the table and its booth, grabbed a chair and lowered himself onto it. The cheap metal legs bent, but held nonetheless. Raphael came by their table as well, smiling at the 4 of them as he approached. "We will wait here for the rest of our brothers and sisters," he explained. "We cannot be sure of what they encountered, so we will give them another hour before we depart for the asylum." Uriel nodded his consent. The older archangel gave them all one last smile and then turned to join the other angels. Beside Uriel, Shandra dropped her bag on the table and began rummaging through it. She pulled out a tin of peaches and some dried meat. "Might as well." The Cambion shrugged as she plunged her dagger into the tin and began cutting the lid off. She cringed at the sound of metal scraping on metal. When it was off, the half-demon lifted it towards the angels around her. "Want any?" Uriel went to shake his head, but decided against it. The Cambion needed food more than he did, but he did not want her to feel more isolated than she already did. As if reading his mind, Ariel reached for a slice of sugary fruit. Azael, however, asked if he could have a piece of the meat instead. Shandra chuckled as she shared her food with him. "Thank you," Uriel said for the 3 of them. He took a bite of the fruit. It bordered on sickly in how sweet it was, but the taste of sugar and peaches that covered his tongue was euphoric. He saw that the food had the same effect on the other 2 angels. It was unlikely that they had anything that resembled food in the last decade. They would not have had much to eat, but their physical forms would still demand food from time to time. They were not only prisoners in sanctuary, but they would have to be scavengers too. "Uriel," the Cambion spoke quietly, so that only the 3 angels around her could hear. "Would you come get Elena with me on our way back? Raphael already said she could stay with us in sanctuary. She's been on her own for longer than this, but I'm worried about her, you know?" Uriel smiled and nodded. It was one of the few times Chandra's guard dropped and her human side became more apparent. "Of course. I think the others would like to see a child in sanctuary." "A child?" Ariel's voice rang with excitement. It was like a beacon to the other angels sitting away from them. "A human child?" she implored. Chandra's eyes glared daggers at her, but it was too late. The other angels had already started walking over. "You've seen a child?" one of the angels asked, a female warrior that Uriel did not recognize. "It has been years since I've seen one up close." "The same goes for me." Azael's deep voice was warm. Uriel could tell that, despite his size and incredible strength, the angel was gentler than he appeared. "Please, tell us about them. Is it a boy or a girl?" Smiles and murmurs of excitement rippled through the angels, who were all gathered around their table now. They were created to love and care for all humans, but children were the embodiment of pure innocence. Seeing the radiance that shone from a human child brought an angel more joy than killing any number of demons. "A girl," Chandra answered. Her gaze was firmly fixed on the table in front of her. "My sister, Elena." There was even more noise at that revelation. Excitement began to turn to uneasiness. "Please," Ariel said calmly, placing one of her hands on Chandra's. "Tell us about Elena. Tell us about your sister." Chandra looked up at the angel across from her and smiled. The Cambion immediately launched into a story about Elena and Hadriel. She started with Elena's first steps. Her sister had matured much more slowly than Chandra, so the Cambion was able to recall the tales with great detail. The angels, Raphael and Uriel included, were captivated by the tales of the small girl stumbling and flailing as she learned to walk. They laughed with Chandra and smiled when the half-demon had to stop in the middle of a sentence, happy memories bringing a tear to her eye. Slowly, over the course of the next hour, the groups of angels began filtering into the diner. They were only met with brief greetings, though. Chandra's audience was too enthralled with her stories. She told them of a pet mouse that Elena had kept when she was 4, how she named it Harry after the angel that had protected them. At the mention of her guardian, Chandra absently started twirling the white feather that was tied into her hair. The group had almost tripled in size by the time Raquiel led the last of the angels in, but they still sat and listened to tales of Chandra and her human sister. Finally, after all angels had been able to hear of the young girl, Raphael interjected. "I'm truly sorry, my lady," Raphael said softly, "but we must be on our way." Uriel looked out over the crowd of angels that had been enthralled by the half-demon. Most wore smiles, while others tried to contain them. It was, after all, a half-demon that had captured their hearts and attention. It was a step in the right direction, the angel thought, but the smiles were already fading, like masks that were on for only a moment. The stern faces of the angels returned, and their hardened eyes would not look at the Cambion any longer. "Fariel, any losses?" Raphael's voice was that of a commander once more. What weak lights they had found to illuminate the diner only exacerbated the scars that marred his face, casting shadows that weaved themselves into the Archangel's tattoos. A few gashes and bruises here and there, but nothing serious. We were meticulous. The demons were caught unawares. Raphael's lieutenant gave a brief summary of their movements through the city. Fariel's groups had moved through the more industrial areas of the town. There were fewer buildings, but the demons had gathered in larger numbers there. The angel was about the same build as Uriel, if slightly shorter. His muscles were well-toned, though, emphasized by the tattoos that ran up and down his arms. Fariel's hair was trimmed short, as was the stubble that framed his light-skinned face. Unlike most of the angels who did not seem to care how they appeared, Fariel was well-groomed, stood straight, and spoke in a disciplined manner. He too bore scars, though more than the other angels. His eyes were a cool blue, orbs that left room for little besides honor and duty. At his hips were his twin axes. Their steel was legendary for how much demonic blood they had spilled. Though Uriel had never truly known the warrior, all of heaven knew of his deeds and his skill with those weapons. "On your end, sir?" Fariel asked. "No losses," Raphael responded. He turned his gaze to the hulking angel next to Uriel. "But Azael cannot continue with us." The massive angel almost leapt from his chair, forcing a wince of pain that slowed his protest. "Sir, please." The large angel sounded betrayed. "I can still help." Raphael moved towards him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Until we clear the rest of the demons from this town, I cannot risk healing you any further. Without your leg at full strength, we risk losing you altogether. Stay here and keep this place safe for us. We will need it to rest afterwards. I'm trusting you with this." Azael, his pride somewhat mended, gave the Archangel a quick nod and sat back down. The other angels had started to check themselves and their equipment, readying each for what was to come. Adrenaline still intoxicated them, as did the demonic blood that stained their leather and their skin. "The rest of us will head to the asylum then," Raphael continued. He released the magazine from one of his pistols to check how many bullets he had left. Satisfied, he reloaded the weapon and pulled on the slide to make sure a bullet was in the chamber, ready to end whatever demon was unfortunate enough to be in front of the Archangel. "Most will stay outside the structure. It is paramount that nothing gets in or out of there that isn't one of us. Uriel, Shandra, Ariel, and Raquiel will come in with me. Fariel, choose 4 others to come with us." Uriel thought it odd that his brother thought something might try to escape from the asylum. A handful of demons might run, but surely they did not need such a force to contain them. "Adriel, Isnir, Aramael, and Barnabas," Fariel said without hesitation. "The rest of you shall remain outside. There are plenty of smaller structures that will need clearing as well. You can divide those among yourself. Just make sure that there are still enough guarding the asylum itself." It was somewhat of a relief for the Archangel to hear that Adriel was going to be with them. He had not shown any hostility towards him or Shandra since they had arrived the day before. The angel, who had a smug smile on his face now, was not like the others. He opted for lighter cloth sewn together in layers rather than the thicker leather that most of the angels were wearing. His blonde hair, still tied back, was a stark contrast to the pitch black of the cloth shirt. At his hip was a steel sword, slender and long. Uriel also recognized Isnir as the angel that had always seemed to be next to Adriel. Where Adriel was graceful and sleek in appearance, Isnir was not. His curly black hair was kept short, though the angel seemed to pay no mind to the scruff growing on his face. He was more muscular than Adriel, but did not carry the same aura of superiority. He wore armor similar to the others, but his weapons were twin daggers, more than twice the length of Uriel's knives, that were strapped to the small of his back. Isnir muttered something to Adriel, which prompted the long-haired angel to roll his eyes. Uriel could not help but notice that Isnir did not, or could not, stop fidgeting. The angel's fingers were always moving, and more than once the Archangel saw him force his foot to stop tapping. "Sir," piped one of the angels among the throng, "why do you choose the half-breed over us?" Uriel's hands curled into fists on the table that he shared with Shandra and Ariel. He was about to bark something at the angel when Shandra placed one of her own hands on her forearm. She didn't look at him, but the gesture spoke loud enough. "It is neither the time nor the place to question me." Raphael's tone was as sharp as Uriel's blade. The older Archangel emphasized his point by releasing the slide of his second pistol, loading a bullet into place with a distinctive click. "If you do not agree, you can go back to the sewers." There was some muttering among the crowd of angels, but no other comments were made. "Good. Let's move." The angels, all but Azael, left the diner. They silently fell into a tight square formation as they moved, with Uriel and Shandra at the front alongside Raphael. A single road snaked away from the town, curving behind a copse of leafless trees. A handful of cars and trucks remained on the road, but were in complete disrepair. Hardly any of them had glass in their windows, while others were missing doors. Raised hoods told the group that they had been scavenged for whatever parts they might have contained. Many of the cars were scorched, their bodies and innards charred by flames that were fueled by gasoline and, from what Uriel could tell, bodies. The angels did not pay the vehicles much mind beyond quick glances inside to make sure nothing was hiding in them. Their heads swiveled back and forth, always scanning the trees that ran parallel to the road for demons that might be lurking in the skeletal forest. "I don't like this," Shandra whispered to Uriel. She stood between him and the other Archangel, while Ariel kept pace behind her. "Neither do I, but we do not have much choice." Uriel looked around as he spoke. They were open here, exposed. He knew that the other angels, with the same vision as himself, were not able to see deep into the trees. They had no idea what would be looking back at them. "But I have traveled in these woods before. We would be blind among those pale trees. At least out here, we can see any attackers coming." "And nothing would be foolish enough to attack this many angels," Raphael added from the Cambion's other side. It seemed to do little to comfort the half-demon, but she did not protest again. Another half-hour passed before the asylum came into view, nestled among the forest. A chain fence ran its perimeter, topped with barbed wire to ensure that none of its former patients escaped. The fence had been torn open in places, and the barbed wire that adorned it was discolored and still clung to pieces of cloth that danced with the slightest breeze. It was a massive compound. The hospital proper loomed in the center, 3 stories of featureless white walls with windows incrementally placed on them. The windows were small, the glass dark or broken and covered with thick iron bars. Some of the iron bars had been bent or torn away by an inhuman force, discarded into the overgrown grass that tried to scale the walls of the hospital. It appeared more like a prison than any sort of medical institution, an imposing monument to the barbarous facade that was once considered medicine. Uriel grew more reviled with each step they took towards the building. This was a shrine to evil, a false idol that only served malice and corruption. But it was not Lucifer or any demon that could claim responsibility for the darkness that had been allowed to exist within these walls. This evil was entirely human. Smaller buildings dotted the property around the hospital. They were newer than the large building before them, their red brick still trying to cling to a vibrancy that even time and war had not been able to completely strip away yet. Those were not Uriel's concern, however. The Archangel was there to free the humans and angels within the asylum itself. But something was wrong. As much as Uriel concentrated, he could not sense any humans in the building. No matter how defeated, a single shred of innocence was all the Archangel needed to know that people were being held prisoner in there. But he could sense none. He could not even sense the remnants of angels. "Raquiel," Uriel asked as the company came to a halt outside of the compound's gates, "can you sense anything inside?" Uriel was going to inform the angel that he could not sense anything, human or otherwise, but stopped himself short. He may be surrounded by his fellow angels, but he did not want to show weakness in front of them. He could tell by the way that they avoided his gaze that they still did not trust him. "No," the attuned angel answered almost immediately. "I cannot sense a thing, not angelic, human, nor demonic." "If this is a prison, you'd think it'd be swarming with demons." Shandra spoke what they had all been thinking. The whole place had an intimidating aura to it. Shandra could feel it, as could the angels around her. "There is surely something in there," Raphael chimed in. "A spell has been placed over the buildings to blind our senses. We have seen demons leading lines of humans and angels through those doors in chains." The group began inching forward then, around the gatehouse that divided the asylum from the road. "I'm sorry." Raquiel lowered his head and gazed at the ground. "I fear I am useless to you then, Raphael. I would understand if you chose someone to replace me in your party." The older Archangel was shaking his head before Raquiel had even finished his sentence. "You aren't that lucky, my friend. I think your abilities will return once we are inside the hospital. If not, I know that your skill with a blade will not be subdued by any demonic magic." Raquiel nodded, forcing a smile at the Archangel. The expression looked alien on his otherwise somber face. The group fanned out as they moved towards the asylum. Their ranks became too deep as they approached. In the dim light of the red afternoon, Uriel could see that the lower areas of the asylum walls were plastered in graffiti and other vandalism. Pictures, profanities, and illegible messages covered the white brick like ivy, sprawling anywhere that human arms might reach. Whether the markings had been made before or after the war had started was impossible to tell, but none of them were recent. Every symbol and image showed signs of wear, except for one. Uriel's feet refused to continue and his eyes fell on the double oak doors that led into the asylum proper. The stained wood had been surprisingly resilient, or well maintained, and showed none of the same defacing as the rest of the building, save for a single seal that was carved across both doors. The sigil, accented with blood fresh enough to still be a vibrant red, consisted of a circle containing a 6-pointed star, each line meeting another at the circle's edge. Infernal script filled the fractal patterns that were contained in the star, which gave the dark words an illusion of depth. Even if the demon's name had not been written around the seal in the same infernal letters, Uriel would have immediately recognized that emblem. Abaddon. Uriel forced the name out of his mouth as strength fled the rest of his body. The angels closest enough to hear Uriel stopped as well, frozen in place by the mere mention of the name. They whispered to each other down the line until every angel had moved closer to view the emblem or lacked the conviction to do so. Uriel turned to his brother, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles had paled. "How could you keep this from me?" Uriel roared. The color faded from his eyes, leaving only white orbs in their place. Uriel's rage consumed him to the point that he did not care who or what might hear him. "Uriel, you need to quiet yourself," Raphael whispered sharply, reaching for his brother's shoulder. The enraged Archangel smacked the comforting hand without letting go of his colorless stare. "I trusted you," Uriel spat the words. "You told me Bodis owned these lands. Bodis is nothing. He is an adder who only survives because he slithers away when he should fight. You have deceived me into facing death itself." Trails of smoke stemmed from the dry grass around Uriel as the Archangel's rage made his inner fire manifest. "We did not trick you." Fariel stepped between the two brothers. His muscular frame, while imposing, seemed insignificant compared to the heat that Uriel was exuding. "Bodis is still our enemy, but do you truly think he could have ruled over all this land on his own? Do you think the snake does not answer to another demon? Remove yourself, Fariel, or I will." Uriel dropped 1 foot back and brought a dagger to bear. "This is between my brother and me." The fire, Uriel's gift from his father, was his greatest strength but his greatest weakness. Fueled by his anger, the deceit of his brother burned tenfold in the mind of the Archangel. Somewhere in his mind, Uriel knew his actions were no longer of his own accord. "Please, give me an excuse." Fariel fell into his own stance, hands ready to snap his axes from their places at his hips. Raphael was trying to say something to the two of them, but Uriel could not hear him. Right now, the only thing that existed was his anger and Fariel, whose hands were threateningly close to his weapons. The Archangel's muscles tensed in anticipation. "Uriel, stop." The Archangel felt a hand touch his arm, a hand that was both light and firm at the same time. "Please." Uriel's head snapped to look behind him, ready to shrug this angel off too. But his fire dimmed, and color returned to his pupils when his eyes met a pair of striking red orbs. Shandra, for the first time since they had left the broken cottage that she and her sister called home, looked scared of the Archangel. Yet, as Uriel came back to his senses, he realized that there was more in the Cambion's eyes than fear. There was empathy. "I'm sorry." Uriel's voice was weak and full of shame. He let Shandra keep her hand on his arm, her touch calming him more and more with every passing second. He turned his gaze to Fariel and his brother. "I did not mean what I said." Raphael moved in front of Fariel. He smiled at his youngest brother. "We know." Raphael was genuine. "A great burden comes with one of his gifts, especially yours. It is I who should be sorry. I should have told you about Abaddon from the beginning. I thought it would be easier for everyone this way." "Did no one else know?" "No." Raphael shook his head. "Only myself, Fariel, and a few others who had done some scouting. Bodis does control the city that we find refuge under, but he, like countless other dukes and barons of hell, pay tribute to Abaddon. I would be surprised if many in Zezerat, demons included, know who really rules this area. Abaddon's kingdom is vast, but the demonic nobility all pay fealty to him." Uriel was silent as he took in the latest revelation. It started to make sense the more he thought about it. Bodis was a baron, but he was weak. Even if he had stolen the lands that he currently owned, another demon lord would have no problem defeating him for it. Demons were opportunistic and their hunger for power insatiable, unless there was something holding them in check. Then there were all the plagues that ran rampant in Zezerat. "Uriel," Shandra broke the angel's train of thought. He had not realized that the other angels had all moved away, preparing for what was to come next. "Exactly what is Abaddon? I've heard the name. Demons whisper it like he's the fucking boogeyman or something." It had never occurred to the Archangel that the half-demon did not know the hierarchy of heaven or hell. It was something that most angels committed to memory, especially those like Uriel who were leaders among the angels. To Shandra, the name Abaddon might not mean anything. If what Raphael said was true, then Shandra probably thought that Bodis was the only demon with its claws around her home. Abaddon is one of Lucifer's champions, one of the princes of hell. He's a demon powerful enough to rival even Michael or Gabriel, the strongest of the archangels. He was one of the first demons to come to Lucifer's aid after he was cast out of heaven. Uriel saw Raphael walking from one group of angels to another, making sure that they knew exactly what they were supposed to do. The fire of God walked closer to the large oak doors that boasted the symbol of Abaddon. He absently studied the design, but, in reality, wanted to move Shandra away from the others as he spoke with the demonic prince. Abaddon is the destroyer. Many humans and angels believe that Lucifer is the source of evil and destruction, but those things existed long before our brother was cast out. Lucifer was the first angel to fall. He is the conjurer of evil, the devil. Abaddon is far more deserving of the moniker Zaitan, the adversary. The demon is a different breed than Lucifer. Where Lucifer is cunning, Abaddon is brutal. Where the fallen angel is deceitful in his dealings, Abaddon is indiscriminate in his brutality. Blind loyalty had made Abaddon an attack dog for Lucifer, else he would be a threat to our brother's throne. More than any other demon, ruin is what Abaddon exists for. Shandra was staring at the gravel path that led up to the door of the asylum. It was mostly dirt and brown weeds now, but the basic outline of the path could still be made out. She opened her mouth to say something, then stopped. She looked at Uriel, as if trying to find the appropriate words. "Shit," was all the half-demon could get out. "Do we stand a chance against him?" "We," the Archangel raised an eyebrow at her. "Your fight is with Bodis. I would not condemn you to a war with Abaddon. Remember, you have your sister to take care of, one we will be seeing soon." Shandra smiled and went to say something, but was interrupted by Raphael and the other angels who told them it was time to enter the boneyard. They both nodded. Uriel and Raphael both took up positions beside the doors, ready to open them. The others who were entering the asylum with them stood ready. Isnir, Ariel, Barnabas, Aramael, and Fariel stood in front, while Shandra, Adriel, and Raquiel stood behind them. The other angels created a defensive perimeter around the entrance, while some had gone to start checking the other buildings. "Raquiel," Raphael spoke to the attuned angel as he gripped one of the door handles. "Can you sense anything yet?" "Not yet," the angel answered. He made his way past the others and placed a hand on the wooden doors. He closed his eyes for a moment and concentrated. "There is definitely some kind of spell blinding me. Allow me to enter and we will see if it is as effective on the inside." Uriel grabbed the other iron handle and pulled at the same time as his brother. The doors did not protest or resist. They made a quiet creak as they swung open on oiled hinges. A rush of air, heavy and reeking of rot, escaped from the asylum and washed over the angels and Shandra. The Cambion drew an arrow and aimed it at the darkness of the asylum's interior. The shadows seemed tangible, as if the darkness that went on in the building had manifested into a wall of darkness. The angels around her shuffled anxiously, signaling that they felt the same. Raquiel seemed unfazed. He walked calmly into the building, only a few steps so he was still within view of the others. The angel had a stoic demeanor. He stood straight and did not show much emotion. So Uriel was surprised when he saw the angel stagger backwards, a look of horror on his face. "There are things in here," the angel forced out, barely loud enough for the others to hear. "Far worse than demons." The other 9 angels rushed into the asylum, filtering around the stunned angel. They formed a protective barrier in front of Raquiel and began moving forward. The asylum was lightless inside. Uriel could not see the ground more than a meter in front of him, even with his enhanced vision. Raquiel's abilities would be essential here, he thought. Uriel could not even see the angels at the other end of their defensive line. Shandra, Ariel, Isnir, and Fariel were all within view, and the Archangel knew that Raquiel was behind him, but those were the only ones he could see. "Uriel," Raphael said, his voice coming from somewhere out of sight, "we could use some light." The Archangel was hesitant to invoke any kind of light. It would give them away to whatever creatures were in there with them. But their enemies seemed to thrive in the darkness, so Uriel granted his brother's request. With a thought and a breath into a glowing blue hand, the darkness around the angel was banished. A circle of sourceless light was created that illuminated a foyer around them. They were barely more than a few meters from the doors, but none of the dim red light from the outside seemed able to enter the asylum. Uriel's light revealed a large marble staircase ahead of them that climbed to a small landing before turning into 2 parallel staircases that went to the next floor. To his right, a hallway extended into the eastern wing of the building. Another led in the opposite direction, beyond the line of companions that stood on his left. The Archangel was able to see all of the company now. Isnir stood taller than the rest. His long daggers were ready in his hands, though his normal confidence was no longer evident. His eyes darted around to take in every cranny and shadow that surrounded them. Next to him stood Aramael and Barnabas, the twin warriors. Each wielded 2 swords. Aramael's right-hand blade matched Barnabas's left, and the blade in Aramael's left matched the one in his brother's right. The 2 were never separated and together presented a deadly pairing. Uriel recalled one of the occasions he had witnessed them on the battlefield. Their fighting style paired gracefully with one another, creating combat that bordered on a beautiful dance. Even off the field of battle, Uriel had known the twins to be compassionate and kind. Beyond the twins were Adriel and Raphael. Adriel had his thin sword at his side, its silver handle glittering in Uriel's conjured light. Though he had not recognized the name or the angel before, Uriel could feel arcane energy emanating from Adriel. Already, Adriel's hand shimmered with crimson energy, ready to be released with a thought. As powerful as Uriel was as an archangel, he could feel a similar level of raw power surround Adriel. Graffiti covered the walls in the asylum, undoubtedly tagged before the war had even begun. Etched between the rebellious artwork, however, were demonic runes that nearly blended in with the paint. They still had the wet shine of fresh blood. The Archangel recognized some of the symbols of power, but the more he looked, the more he saw sigil after sigil of infernal magic. "There are sigils on the walls," Adriel spoke softly, but loud enough for the entire party to hear. He echoed Uriel's thoughts almost exactly. Infernal symbols hidden in the vandalism. Uriel regarded the Arcane Angel once again. It was uncanny how his words had mirrored the Archangel's thoughts, as if Adriel were actually in his head. "If you are," Uriel thought, his words loud in his mind, "please leave." He saw Adriel smirk, but could not be sure that the angel had been listening to his thoughts. It mattered not, the Archangel decided, at least not for now. He walked ahead of the line of angels towards the middle of the foyer. Clasping his hands together, Uriel spoke in angelic. "Burn," he whispered in the tongue of angels. All around him, the paint and blood symbols burst into flames for a fraction of a second. It started at the base of the walls and quickly crept its way up, reducing the runes and graffiti to ash that floated to the floor and left nothing but bare walls behind. With the hellish magic destroyed, Uriel's senses were able to extend farther out into the asylum. As one, save for Raquiel, the angels turned and looked down the east corridor. Even Shandra seemed to feel the terrible evil down there, now that the magic that hid it was gone. They realized that this is what Raquiel had felt before, something darker than demons, something deadlier. The twins drew their swords and fell into a stance that seemed to protect the other more than themselves. The shimmer around Adriel's hands grew brighter and extended to his elbows in response to the entities hidden in the darkness. Isnir even staggered back a step, as if struck by this new sensation. Uriel had never felt this kind of presence before. The creatures, whatever they were, scurried over and around each other in anticipation. Their malice could be tasted in the air around the group. Then, without warning, the dark entities stopped scrambling and charged, as one, down the hallway towards the angels. Scratching could be heard as claws scraped along the cold, concrete floor and against the plaster walls. The Archangel could not see into the corridor, his light blocked by whatever magic remained in the hospital, but he knew the creatures would be upon them soon. Without a thought, Uriel raised his hand and pointed a finger down the hallway. A ball of light, small but brilliant, shot forward and illuminated the darkness. As it traveled, it dispelled the shadows that cloaked the unseen entities. When the holy light approached them, the angels felt the creatures turn tail and escape back into the shadows. The darkness was where they were safe, and Uriel worried, where they ruled. "Good thinking, brother," Raphael congratulated him. But the younger angel had not even thought about conjuring the ball of light, nor was it mere instinct that forced his hand. It was fear. I need some water. And so ends chapter 10. I really should have split this into two parts because it's a long chapter and my poor throat hasn't done this in forever. But yeah, so our angels and our Cambion have now made it to the asylum and taken a few steps inside, and they are not super thrilled with what's going on in there because they have these senses that can detect other entities, whether good or evil. They already know they're in for one heck of a fight, and that's coming up in chapter 11. So stay tuned for that. It's coming next week. It's a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite chapters in the book. And then we get into some real serious stuff after. If you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. Beyond that, stay tuned for some other videos. Again, if you haven't seen my update video from last week, I'm popping it up there in the corner again, and it'll be down in the description. You just get a lot of updates about Revelations, Book 2 of Shadow's Advent, where that's at and how that's coming along. Spoiler, it will be here soon. And you guys will be the first to know if you're subscribed. And on that note, click down below to subscribe. Hit that little bell. You'll always know when I put a video out. And leave a comment and let me know what you thought about chapter 10. If you've made it this far and you haven't listened to the other chapters or read the book, well, you might be a little lost. But there is a playlist that contains all the chapters leading up to this one from chapter 1. And there will be a link to buy Archangel down in the description below. If you haven't already, it's available in ebook and paperback, whichever your preferred version. As always, I'd like to thank my patrons, Chris, Derek, Koyan, Eric. You all rock. If you are interested in supporting me and becoming a patron, I will leave a link down below too. There will be a new Nightshade story coming out for patrons in a week or two. Now that Revelations doesn't need more words added to it, I can focus on that while waiting for some feedback on Revelations. So, beyond that, thanks for stopping by. Always a pleasure. I hope you're enjoying the read-along of Archangel. I hope everyone's staying safe. and stay inside, and I'll see you later.